Welcome back to the show. It is 8:39 on a Monday morning, and it is great to have independent MLC Bec Thomas join us in the studio. Morning, Bec. Nice to see you.
Good morning, guys.
Morning,
Bit
Bec.
going on in your world at the moment. You've got a bit of pressure on, or you will have in a few weeks' time, we hope, when the vote takes place for Macquarie Point Stadium. How are you feeling about things right now?
Oh, look, I'm really keen right now to see the draft legislation. Well, all the legislation, I should say. I think the government's indicated that it's going to be releasing it this week. So I'm really keen to see what it looks like because, as I've continually said, I'm not in a position to form a position on yes or no for the stadium until I've really had a good look at what's in the legislation, what we're actually being asked to vote on.
Can I put it to you? So I see you at the basketball all the time. I know you love sport. Like, could I say you like the idea of having a stadium, but you need more answers? Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's right, Brent. I think, and I've said this repeatedly, if I'm making a decision with my heart, I want a stadium, I want a team. I think Tasmania deserves to have an AFL team. It's been a long time coming, it's well overdue, and it's a real crying shame that the issue of a stadium has created the division and meant that we're not celebrating something that we really should be able to be celebrating. On the stadium, I think we deserve to have the infrastructure that other states have, and I understand and appreciate the economic and social benefits that stadium infrastructure could bring to Tasmania if it's done properly. But that's what we've got to be assured of in making this decision, is that this is the right location, that it is a viable location to build a stadium, and that we're not going to send future generations broke by doing it. We've got to be sure that the operating model for a facility like this is right, so that it's not going to cost taxpayers, truckloads of money each year to operate.
Bec, I think a couple of days ago or yesterday there was an article in the paper around the 5 questions that you would want answered. Do you have a time frame on that, or have you been speaking to key stakeholders and getting answers along the way, or do you expect that to be given to you soon so you can make a more informed decision?
I've put a number of questions to the government, certainly a lot more than just those 5 that I sort of mentioned at a media conference the other day, that those 5 got picked up. And they do in summarise sort of my concerns in a nutshell, or the questions I want answers to. But there are a lot more detailed questions that still need to be answered. And I expect I will have a lot more questions arising when the draft legislation or the legislation is released. I expect that there will be a significant number of conditions, hundreds of conditions attached to a development permit. And I think, we're not voting yes or no for a stadium. What Parliament will be asked to do is to approve a development permit, right? And I've been the chair of a planning authority as the mayor of Glenorchy, and I know the complexity of planning applications and the planning permit process. And I certainly take it very seriously, the responsibility to assess planning applications and make sure they are conditioned to be suitable developments, right? So what's going to be really important is the conditions that are attached and how those conditions were developed and what advice government received to develop those conditions, and also importantly the governance framework for signing off on those conditions. I think it's really important that Tasmanians understand, should this pass through the Parliament, it's not, there's still going to be a number of hurdles to go through for this stadium to be out of the ground and be developed.
What are they? Can you expand on that?
So, putting it simply, if you get a DA to build a house, you've got a development permit, but usually it'll be conditioned. And simple conditions are like, then you've got to get a building permit and a plumbing permit, right? So if the Parliament issues a development permit, then still the government's going to have to go through those other hoops. And for example, the design and construct plans won't be done when we come to vote on this. That will be, who's going to be issuing the building permit for the stadium? Will it be the City of Hobart as the planning authority, or will it be the State Planning Office, Tasmanian Planning Commission? These are all questions we have that need to be answered.
Well,
why has it been so messy, do you think, Bec? Like from the governance part of it with our government, I feel like there's a lot of people who are offside purely because of the way this whole situation's been handled, the lack of clarity and the lack of answers and understanding around such an enormous project.
Tim, I think it comes down to relationships. You know, relationships are everything, and relationships are so important in getting things done and bringing people along on the journey. And that's what this government has failed to do the whole way through this project. The whole reason that this is even a decision of Parliament is because we had the Lara Alexander and John Tucker issue, and the Premier failed to maintain, I guess, effective relationships with them and bring them on the journey of what was going on here. He signed a deal with the AFL without consultation with his cabinet, without consultation with the people of Tasmania, without consultation with the Parliament. So, you know, ultimately it comes back to relationships and bringing people on the journey, and that's where the government's really let the people of Tasmania down here.
What's the timeline look like from here? We might see this draft legislation as soon as tomorrow, I've heard. I don't know if you've heard the same thing, but how long do we look at that for before you discuss in Parliament and debate it in Parliament, do you think?
I hope, and certainly my feedback to the Premier's office was make sure there is at least consultation with members of Parliament on the legislation before it's tabled, whether they do go down that line or not. I'm not sure. When I spoke to the Premier a few weeks back, I did suggest that there ought to be a period of public consultation as well, for the public to have a look at the draft. But I mean, it is... In reality, it's going to be a really complex piece of legislation in terms of the actual conditions, you know. So it's not going to be a simple thing to sort of for the everyday person to digest with respect. Like it is going to be quite complex, and we're not planning experts in Parliament, so we will be relying on the government providing advice and briefings from wherever they are getting their advice, whichever agencies and regulatory bodies are providing the advice, and perhaps independent planning consultants. But we'll also need to be assured of the objectivity of that advice too.
What about the people in your community, Bec? What's the common view on it? Is it as polarising as we're being made out, or is there a strong view in support or against?
It's a really good question, Tim, and it's really it's one of my biggest challenges is trying to get a good understanding of how the people who I represent want me to vote on this. I am a big fan of sport, and I'm a big supporter of community sport, and I spend quite a bit of time in and around sporting clubs, and there the message really is clearly, you know, we want this, you know, we want a team, and we understand, for the most part, people in my community seem to understand that the stadium is a requirement now if we are to have a team. So there seems to be quite a level of support in those circles, but I'm very conscious that I also need to hear from other people in my community who aren't necessarily involved in sport and who don't necessarily follow the AFL and sport. And for them, the conversation's more about the broader benefits that a stadium can bring in terms of jobs and future of young people. And I do hear that from some people, but then, of course, you know, we've got people coming into our office every day with issues with access to health services and housing, and for them, this stadium's not even on their radar. They're struggling with basic health, housing, cost of living issues. That, you know, it's really a privilege for us to be considering this as an issue. Yep.
Bec Thomas is our guest on SEN Tassie Breakfast. You and I have done a few stories on Home for Hobart recently. This is for the Hobart Phoenix Basketball Club and the broader basketball community that don't have anywhere to play at the moment. Well, certainly there's places to play, but there's not enough courts. We're going to lose Swisher soon. It's a big story. Can you leverage your stadium decision with the government to try and get something for Hobart basketball as well?
Well, Brent, I've for a long time, even before the hype around the stadium decision, I've been for a long time advocating for more places for kids to play sport, for more indoor community court facilities. So this is not a new ask that I'm making of the government. I'm ramping it up now because we are at a crisis point. And as you say, Swish is going to close. Hobart Phoenix are going to be having to turn kids away in less than 12 months' time if the government doesn't urgently act to invest a relatively small amount of $12.5 million compared to the amount they're investing in high-performance infrastructure in new community courts at Newtown Bay. Now, can I leverage my position here with the government needing my support for the stadium? Well, that's really a matter for the government, is what I would say to that. I don't think it's about, the government should do this so that I support the stadium. It's the government should do this because there is an evidence-based need. This is long overdue, and they need to show our local kids and our local clubs that they matter just as much as the big guns.
Got one off the Harcourts open line, our text line here, Bec. Harcourts, we make it possible. Can you ask Bec what insight she got when she travelled to Adelaide recently to learn about the Adelaide Oval redevelopment?
Yep. Thanks for the question, and I like to just say for the record that my trip to Adelaide was fully self-funded. I want to make that clear. It was well worth the trip. We certainly learned that we're not comparing apples with apples when you talk about Adelaide Hobart. There was a stadium already there in Adelaide. It was a redevelopment project. However, there was significant opposition to the Adelaide Oval redevelopment. It was a significant spend of money, and there was opposition to that project. But critically, what we learnt of importance here is that the operating model is crucial. You know, you have to sweat the asset if it is to be a viable business proposition. Now, not many stadiums across the country make money. Most run at a loss. So, you know, it's probably reasonable for us to expect that our stadium will run at a loss. However, what's an acceptable loss? You know, what is it acceptable for Tasmanian taxpayers to pay each year to be able to have that stadium here to bring in the broader economic benefits and jobs for our state? That's the question, and that's the question that I'm putting to the government. And Stadiums Tasmania really need to release its operating model to help inform our decision making when it comes to this vote we're going to have to make.
Last one before I let you go, because we'll get to a break, unfortunately, but you issued a media release this morning about cricket and potentially cricket providing some funding to go into Macquarie Point Stadium. We had Don Baker on the show a little earlier, just to paraphrase what he had to say. He's not sure why they need to pay for Mac Point, especially when they already have a place to play. They've injected a lot of money into Ninja Stadium over the journey. What's your response to that?
Oh, look, I think all parties really ought to be working together if they really want this for Tasmania. You know, that's what I would say to that. I appreciate cricket's investment in Ninja Stadium and the broader community benefits that brings. But, you know, if cricket does want to play in a new venue going forward and thinking future focused about the future of cricket in generations to come, I would think it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect cricket at the national level to invest in the stadium. And really what this is about is that the cost is one of the biggest concerns for Tasmanians here and the biggest concerns for people opposing the stadium. The government ought to be doing all it can to minimise the cost to the taxpayer, and that involves asking those who will be anchor tenants to make a contribution.
Great to have you in. You've got a big few weeks ahead. All the best with whatever decision you make. And thanks for coming in on SEN Tassie Breakfast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Bec Thomas, Independent MLC, joining us in the studio. We're off to our final break of the morning at 8:52. Coming back to wrap up the show next.
But I will say as well, how good was Bec Thomas there? It's nice to have someone come on and speak common sense and lay it out in terms that we can understand than a lot of the political jargon we get thrown a lot of the time. So I thought she was absolutely awesome in that interview just then. We're lucky to have her on.
Yep, and we'll play a big role coming up over the next month or so with the eventual vote in the upper house. So, yeah, great to have Bec on. And I'll tell you what, Tim, I couldn't agree more about this home for Hobart. I mean, $12.5 million, it's all we're asking. Just build it. Like, if you can find 45 for the high performance centre, you can find 12.5 for grassroots basketball. It's crazy. All right, we're going to get out of here. Good show this morning. Have a nice week, whatever you're up to, and we'll see you bright and early on Friday morning for more SEN Tassie Breakfast.